Hi, welcome back to Hegel on the beach. This is not the beach, as you can see. It's a graveyard in the middle of Buchel. It's around the corner from where I live. And this week's number 14, and we're going to be doing Stoicism, Skepticism, and the Unhappy Consciousness. It might be that it picks up on the wind, and it might be a bit wobbly, the camera. So I might have to redo this one, but we'll see how it goes. So you might get a bit of wind on the mic. Okay, so just readjust my mic. Okay, so Stoicism. That's the first part of this section, self-consciousness. So I found out while I was putting this video together that there was a conference that took place last year. This is 2022, and this conference was called Stoicon 21 in Canada. And it was the world's largest ever gathering of modern Stoics. So Stoicism is still going strong. And if you look at existential comics on the web, right, and you type in Stoicism, you'll get a hilarious take on Stoicism. A woman has a bag stolen while she's fighting with the thief, and the Stoic sage tells her not to fight, but to accept the theft, and that her real battle is not with the thief, but with her own feeling of anger, which is ridiculous. So I've got a Stoic joke, okay, so Epictetus goes to the dentist. Epictetus, the Stoic sage, and says, no fancy stuff, no anaesthetic, just pull the tooth and get on with it, just get on with it. Wow, said the dentist, you know, you're the famous Stoic Epictetus, aren't you? You're actually living the Stoic way, you know, wow. I mean, which tooth is it? And Epictetus turns to his wife and says, show him the tooth, darling. Okay, you Stoic joke. Oh, and one other thing, as I'm on the subject of jokes, last week, do you remember my Parker? Yes, my lady. Well, apparently Parker is the voice of Grandad in Peppa Pig. So come on, it's got to be out there. Anyway, how is Stoicism different from the philosophy of Plato? So they both seem to be a rejection of the messy world and our temporal bodies, our mortal coils. So Plato believed that the true essence of what is didn't lie in the physical world, but somewhere else, you know, somewhere over the rainbow. That's Judy Garland, sorry, she said that. Okay, the true essence lies in the world of forms. We can only get to the true essence of things through pure thought. And what we think of reality is, Plato explained his famous analogy, it's just like the appearance of shadows in a cave, on the wall of a cave. And reality, therefore, is located somewhere else. The Stoics, on the other hand, believed in a physical world, and they rejected Plato's theory of forms. And they can be described as materialists, or sort of materialists. But they too believed that what was the true and the good lay in our souls and not in our bodies. Okay, so Plato's philosophy was that of the slave owner. And a kind of Marxist analysis of Plato is easily the most convincing. Theirs is the ideology of and for those who don't work. Okay, straightforward. And you know, most of the conversations that we have in the modern world, if you think about it, revolve around work. And about work and our work colleagues, or about leisure with our work colleagues. And when we get home, we talk about work all the time. Work, work, work. Almost every politician talks about hard work and family. So work's everywhere, isn't it? Can't get away from it. But in Hellenistic society, in classical Athens, most of the conversations didn't actually relate to work. Most of the conversations of the citizens, I should say, not the slaves. And I really mean that seriously. So people having those conversations in classical society weren't workers. In ancient Athens, slavery was incredibly widespread. And I read somewhere that only the very poorest people in Athenian society didn't own any slave. So most people who were citizens at least owned one slave. So slave owners, even if that's not true, apparently it's pretty accurate. So slave owners, the actual citizens, they'd wander down to central Athens, not to talk about work or with the workmates. They talk about, you know, platonic, and I was going to say platonic bullshit, but obviously some of it wasn't, some of it was about the nature of the universe. But they would talk about something, maybe war, maybe a bit about war, about getting more slaves to make their existence even easier. And whether we like it or not, that is still the basis of Western civilization. And you and me, and this conversation, or one-sided conversation that we're having. And a political point, I like a nice political point. So many Western leftists, I think, they misrecognize these horrible slave origins of who we are. And it's a bit like, going on Ancestry.com or something like that and finding out that Himmler was your granddad. That's what the history of humanity is, But they want their politics just like their morality, which is just impossibly pure. I mean, from a pure font. I don't mean doing the right thing now. I mean pure. I want a pure socialist or a pure revolutionary creed with absolutely no imperfections. And they want their ideals ideal. Like Athena, the way Athena was born from the head of Zeus, like completely formed. But the real world is compromised. It's ugly. And they retreat, sadly, into this world of the pure forms, this Platonic world of, peace, equality, also with an additional hatred of the West, hatred of actually where it comes from, where everything comes from. No, I'm not accepting Aristotle, not Plato, not that thinker. They're all, yeah, I agree, they are like that, but that's the way it is. That's the way things emerged. So the kind of like self-hating Platonists is the way I describe some of these, some of the people who, as over these video series who get on my nerves on the left. So the base of Western civilization, it probably still is Plato, male slave owners, privileged people in ivory towers with no work to do. They have inspired cosmic thoughts, and in a sense, philosophy hasn't really changed that much. So to have sufficient time to devote to the nature of the universe, you can't really do a full-time job. Let's be honest about it. That's the big joke of this video series. You can't do it. So famous philosophers like Daniel Dennett and Noam Chomsky, right, for example, they've never done a real day's work in their life. Yes. So it's the mind-body problem, isn't it? So I'm doing these series of lectures, which is a bit of it's not a joke. I'm doing it for real, but I'm doing it part-time because I'm working part-time. And I've got a 6-week holiday in the summer, so I did loads of reading, and I've been reading for a few years about the topic. So I'm not doing it because I've been at work today, so I'm doing it at the end of the day. And also when I was younger, I was lucky enough to go to uni to do philosophy, political philosophy and stuff like that. And my brother was the first, like, in the Glover family to go to university in the late 60s. So really, we come from a long line of illiterates. I come from a long line of non-educated Glovers. That changed, it's like in the blink of an eye, an instant ago, 1945, the welfare state made stuff like this possible. But even then, philosophy and politics at the highest level, it's still very largely, despite the welfare state, it's still like ancient Athens, isn't it? It's still the activity of workers working and masters thinking, which is Platonism. Stoicism, on the other hand, although it rejects the body, emerges from the experience of slavery. It's a noble attempt to find a way out, and it never does. So the Stanford Online philosophical entry for Stoicism says that Stoicism tells you how you should regard death, suffering, great wealth, poverty, power over others, and slavery in the political and social context of the Hellenistic period, where a person could move between these extremes in very short order. Stoicism provided a psychological fortress. I think it's pretty good there. The master doesn't really accept the recognition of a slave because he's just the thing. Was it something vocalis, talking tool? But the slave has this inner world that the master's got no access to. And this is, well, it's not just a kind of an attractive thing. I mean, it's a really attractive thing. Now moving a bit to skepticism and Sextus Empiricus, if you remember, the guy we met in video 1 or 2, who Hegel sort of admired his method, which is doubt everything. He takes Stoicism, I beg your pardon, a bit further. Having this inner Stoic slave experience is a goal. And for skepticism, ataraxia, or an attitude of indifference, is the goal. So skepticism accepts the limitations of our knowledge. Because we can't know anything for sure, we need to suspend judgment. So skeptics like Pyrrho, he'll be happy, whereas by contrast, the dogmatists are exhausted by arguing all the time and theorising. That's not the goal. And Immanuel Kant, I keep on coming back to Kant, don't I? He's probably the target for Hegel in this. I keep on saying he's the target, but he is throughout the book. And he turns out to be, in Hegel's eyes, and probably he's right, a skeptic, because he actually is a skeptic about the thing in itself. He doubts certain knowledge of things. We can only know appearances. Remember back in other lectures. So Hegel now, 202. Hegel says, part of 202, skepticism is the realization of that of which Stoicism is only the concept, and it is the actual experience of what freedom of thought is. So Harris says ancient skepticism probably had two origins, though the question of its origin is a murky one. On the one hand, a group of hard-headed Stoic students seem to have become convinced that a comprehensive or positive wisdom is impossible, and that this negative admission is the proper stance for the sage. On the other hand, the same conclusion was arrived at because of our empirically bounded situation in the Platonic Academy. He goes on. What is important to Hegel is academic skepticism, because that's of the academy. Because he is convinced that the dialectical character of speculative thought was discovered by Plato as he mediated on the poem of Parmenides and the arguments of Zeno. That gets a bit cloudy there, doesn't it, the last bit? So I didn't want to follow Harris too far, because we seem to be going down a very complex rabbit hole. But Harris says that for this, he's the negative moment of the motion of thought from understanding to speculation that he ascribes to the great academic skeptics, and especially to Carneades, C-A-R-N-E-A-D-E-S, Carneades. Now, okay, that's a very long, I've like rambled a bit there. It's not me, it's Harris, he's rambled. But Carneades, interesting. I'd want to get to him because he lived 200 BC. He was a sophisticated skeptic, very sophisticated, dead clever. He apparently scandalized the Roman historian Cato the Elder because he argued both in favor of justice and against it on successive days. So who do that? Okay, so he sounds like a wiseacre, doesn't he? Sounds like a wiseacre. And by the way, he was trying probably to prove a point, but Cato, the fellow who questioned him, the Roman guy, you might have heard of him because he was the guy who famously demanded Carthagio, I'm going to do a bit of Latin here, Carthagio delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. So Cato he was a Roman man's man. He got no time for the sophisticated Greeks. He was a tough, plain-speaking soldier, but he kind of did have a point, I think. Arguing against both things at once is, you can't take people seriously, can you, if they do that? So just dwelling one moment on Cato, because he wrote a book about gardening and stuff like that, Cato, and one about soldiering. But he was a soldier, poor background, man of action, and he wrote this to his son as a piece of advice. In due course, my son Marcus, I shall explain what I found out in Athens about these Greeks and demonstrate what advantage there may be in looking into their writings while not taking them too seriously. They are a worthless and unruly tribe. Take this as a prophecy. When those folk give us their writings, they will corrupt everything. So that's Cato. So I thought I just got to squeeze that in. But Carneades was important as a skeptic because he explains that certainty is impossible, which is kind of like, maybe you all think that, and that we must always suspend our judgment and that we should be guided by the probable. A certainty doesn't exist. So the probabilist, I think he invented something, or people who followed on, even in theology, followed a school called probabilism. So probabilism holds that in the absence of certainty, plausibility or truth likeness is the best criterion, which is I think it makes sense. But anyway, even though he's arguing two ways, right? But I gave it that bit. So Stoicism observes that everyone is a rational being. It's a universal doctrine. Bodily existence is a form of slavery, and if we say that, even the physical pain of being punched in the face is an evil, we are agreeing to be slaves. So if you go, oh, don't do that, no, you're a slave. You haven't escaped from that, from human bondage. So we need to leave the sense world behind, according to Stoicism, by our own free and rational act. Harris says this: skepticism achieves the reality of independence and of the release. It already enjoys the advantage of what Stoicism achieved conceptually, since it is free thought and has become conscious of its independence. Hume's reduction of necessity, of causality, to custom, probability, is in the authentic spirit of Carneades. So he's Hume's a Carneadean, but we can see that it's a powerful argument. So I want to quote more from Stanley Rosen's Hegel, An Introduction to Wisdom, which is really good, the bit on Stoicism. He says, "We have now arrived at the threshold of history in the proper sense, the war and work of self-consciousness. This is the history of the unhappiness or homelessness of the human spirit. The slave becomes a Stoic. According to Hegel, Stoicism is the first philosophical response to universality. It's a universal doctrine, yeah? The Stoic is the first man to respond philosophically to both aspects of human life, enjoyment and work, or theory and practice." So this from Rosen is pure, it's surprisingly, actually, because he was a Platonist, it's pure Karl Marx. Self-consciousness, we recall, originates in dread before death. The consequences of this dread for the slave is work. At first, the slave conceives of himself as an instrument of the will of the master, and so as dependent upon him, but also as limited by the objects of the external world, even by those which he himself produces. That's Marx, isn't it? You've created these objects that dominate you. So the slave is alienated from his own essence as it is contained in the products of its labour. So that again, it's Marx, isn't it? And that's Stanley Rosen. So the presence of physical labour, the moments of difference within mental freedom, and the moments of unity in the Stoic are all exhibited in the transformation of the Stoic into the skeptic. The Stoic is born in an incomplete but nevertheless genuine human experience of work. Stoicism is related to work, and work that's taken off you. The product is taken off you, like under capitalism. So the Stoic is born in an incomplete but genuine experience of work and gives rise to the skeptic as the virile expression of his own incertitude. Stoicism and skepticism coexist, as do mastery and slavery. Whereas Platonism is the repudiation of work by a master, Stoicism is the denial of its significance by a slave. And a bit more. Stoicism then is the first effort of the slave to transform himself into a master, by dreaming. He remains within the horizon of Platonism. The essence of the whole for him is thought separated from life. It's the concept of freedom, but not freedom itself. I think I missed a word out there. The Stoic incorporates the results of his work into his thought in a negative sense only by denying its significance. Hegel refers to this as an incomplete negation. So, the Stoic believes himself to escape from the external or physical reality by ignoring the concreteness, ignoring the details, and preserving it as a kind of determination in general. The skeptic, on the other hand, completes the negation of the world initiated by the Stoic by actually working on the determinations of the world in the thinking and the negative work of analytic thinking. Okay, so a bit of a long quote there. The skeptic destroys the significance of thinking as the Stoic does not. And finally, the unhappy consciousness, or the essential structure of European history until Hegel, is thus the recognition of skepticism by skepticism of its internal scission. European man caught in the dialectic I'm now describing is a nihilist whose consciousness is alienated from its essence. The unhappy consciousness emerges in the conflict between Stoic and skeptic, which we're going to come to next. So that's kind of a quick skepticism thing. And next is the unhappy consciousness. So Rosen says that modern Europe is born from the work of the slave seeking to rediscover his master. And I'm going to come to it next week. The Crusades is an example of a staging post on that road to discovery and disappointment, ultimately. I'm going to come to it, as I said, when we look at unhappy consciousness next time. But this passage from Phenomenology is from this section. Hegel says, for consciousness, what can thus be for it at the present time can only be the grave of its life. However, because this grave itself is an actuality, and since it is contrary to the nature of this actuality to confer any lasting possession, the present moment of that grave is only the struggle over an endeavour that must end in defeat. However, while consciousness has learned from the experience that the grave of its actual unchangeable essence has no actuality, that the vanished singular individuality as vanished is not true individuality, it will give up searching for the unchangeable singular individuality as actual, or it will cease trying to hold on to it as something that's vanished. Only then is it, for the first time, capable of finding singular individuality as genuine or as universal. Okay, right, sorry. We're going to talk about that next week. So Hegel's mentioned the grave about 4 times there. And what he's referring to is Jesus' grave, okay? And also people who was looking for the grave, okay, after the apostles, the people who went looking for the grave, the people who travelled thousands of miles to see the grave were the Crusaders. And I'm kind of into the Crusaders. I've been reading a bit about it today. So next week we'll be talking a little bit more about what the Crusades, what was going on in people's heads with the Crusades, and why was that another staging post on this journey. Okay, so might have to do this again because it's a bit windy, but next time, unhappy consciousness for sure. Okay, see you later.